Okairi, welcome back to my channel, Made Between the Pages. My name is Taylor, and today we're going to be doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I know this is many booktubers' favorite tag to do, and I definitely see why. I'm also tempted to agree, because it gives us a chance to reflect on what we've done already this year in our reading lives, and it's just kind of fun to have a summary of things, after 6 months. Now, in this tag, I did try my best to not have one book pop up multiple times or have certain books kind of take over the tag, but there are some books that pop up more than once because they are the answer to the question. But, I did my best to kind of include books from throughout the year. The first question off the bat triggers me, but it is, what is your favorite book from the first half of this year? Now, any reader knows asking what your favorite book is of all time is a struggle for most readers. And also asking what their favorite book, really at any point in time, is really difficult. But for this one, I did narrow it down to one that I think just has to take this spot. And the one that has to take the crown is Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. Now, I know you haven't seen me talk about this book or this series so much on my channel, but don't get it twisted. I am a huge Brandon Sanderson fan. I have a whole shelf on my bookshelf that isn't in frame, I don't think. Oh, you can see a little bit of it maybe. I have a whole shelf that is dedicated just to Brando Sando. I have all of the UK hardback editions of Stormlight Archive. I've gone out of my way to find those. I'm a huge fan. And what pulls me in time and time again is that these books, especially Stormlight Archive, because they're over 1,000 pages, take me a month to read every time I pick them up for the first time. But I enjoy literally every second of being in this world every time that happens. When it comes to world building, payoff of character arcs, magic systems, the Stormlight Archive is unmatched in my opinion. It's just an incredible series, and I look forward to every release of it from the bottom of my heart, and I enjoy, like I said, every second of being in it when I read it. So if that isn't the mark of a fantastic book, I don't know what is. So even though I haven't talked about this book much since I read it, this is gonna have to take the top spot of the best book I've read so far this year, I think, because the craft is just chef's kiss. The next question is the best sequel you've read so far this year. Now, if you've seen tags on my channel before, you know I often give multiple answers to each question because we do what we want here, we make our own rules. So I'm gonna give a couple answers to this one. The first one is going to be Fires of Vengeance, the sequel to Rage of Dragons, which you can see behind me, and the second book in the Burning series. I'm not sure if it's going to be a trilogy or what in the end, but this is a series by Evan Winter. And this second book does an amazing job of taking the groundwork and the character archetypes and personalities we've developed in the first book and expanding upon them by using side characters to give them more dynamics, by using world building to expand on the very strong nugget of world building we got in the first one. It just does an amazing job of expanding the scope of this story. So if you're someone who read The Rage of Dragons and you kind of felt like there was a bit too much focus on our main character Tao and not much exploration outside of that, I think that this book will give you what you've been craving. I'm not going to be giving summaries of all these books. I have too many to talk about, and plus for the Stormlight Archive, like if you've never heard of that, I don't know, maybe you just don't read adult fantasy, which is fine. But I'll just do a very, very brief one of The Fires of Vengeance. As I mentioned, this is the second book in an African-based military fantasy where we follow our main character Tao on his vendetta, on his mission to get revenge on those in the upper echelons of his society. It's a world that has a high-cost magic system, some really interesting world-building aspects to it, and it's just something that I highly, highly recommend. The next sequel is probably a shock to no one who has seen my recent videos on this channel, but that is Wondersmith by Jessica Townsend. This is the second book in the Nevermore series, and this book blew my mind in May. When I tell you I loved every single page of this book, I was so invested. Like, Nevermore is cute and whimsical and wonderful. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars, but this book is the one that made me in for the whole ride. The whimsical world building, the found family aspects. I mean, this book is just top tier middle grade literature. In the first book, we follow Morgan Crow, who is a cursed child and is supposed to die on her 11th birthday. However, instead of dying, she gets whisked away by this man called Jupiter North to a whimsical world of Nevermore. In Nevermore, she takes 3 magical trials to see if she can enter into the prestigious magical school there. And this book picks up where the first one left off. And the third one I'm going to talk about is a little bit debatable as to whether it's a sequel, because it is kind of like a novella between 2, but that is going to be Dawn Shard by Brandon Sanderson. This is the novella between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, and it follows one of my favorite characters, well, many of my favorite characters actually. I don't want to give anything away, even who's involved, because there's just a lot of plot threads that could be ruined if I mention anything specific, but this book had an incredible payoff. We get to spend some time with some very lovable side characters, see their personal growth, and see that personal growth have an effect on the main story in Rhythm of War. So this book was just fantastic. I enjoyed every second of reading it. I feel like Brando Sando almost wrote this book for me because of all of the points that it hit like right on the head for me. So this book is incredible. I love it from the bottom of my heart. And yeah, it's definitely one of the most enjoyable like sequels I've read this year. Okay, finally, we are on to question number 3, which is a new release or anticipated release that you haven't read yet, but you want to. And for that, it's going to be Master of Jinn. I haven't read this author before at all, but I remember seeing this cover, I think on an anticipated release list somewhere on the internet, and it kind of grabbed my attention, but it didn't stick. But recently I've been seeing a lot of people I know and I trust talking about how much they love this book, and it's solidified it as something I definitely want to pick up. And it's a very new release, I think even this month, so I really hope to pick this up in the second half of the year at some point. I don't remember anything about the synopsis. I'm just going based on what people I know like the same things as me like. The fourth question is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. This one, I have 2, I don't even need to think about it. The first one is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. It is the 3rd book in the Greenbone saga. I have the 2 behind me, Jade City and Jade War. I'm obsessed with this series. It's one of my favorite adult fantasies of all time. I'm really excited to see the end of this and simultaneously terrified because Fonda Lee is not afraid to make your favorites suffer. She does not pull punches. So the setup that happened in Jade War, I don't know if I'm ready, but like I'm ready, but I don't know. I don't know. Either way, cannot wait to get my hands on this. I also heard that she's going to be releasing a novella with Subterranean Press, which like I would love to get my hands on a Subterranean Press book, and Fonda Lee being one of my favorites. I'm very interested in that, but I don't think that's until next year, but that's a fun little tidbit. The second one is The Splinter King, which is the sequel to The Black Coast, which I have behind me. You can see it on my shelf here. I have an individual review for The Black Coast. I also talked about it in my most recent wrap-up. I'll be sure to link those up above and down below. But this series was a wonderful, amazing, surprising discovery that I had on my channel. When I was reading The Black Coast in May, I fell in love with it, and I'm now obsessed with this world. So I cannot wait for The Splinter King to come out. I think it comes out in September. And I mean, girl, that pre-order it's been done. Number 5 is biggest disappointment. For this one, I'm also going to go with 2 answers. My first answer for this is going to be The Kingdom of Liars by Nick Martell. Now, I wanted to love this book. First off, it is stunning. The cover, can we just take that in for a second? Also, some other people that I have similar tastes to enjoyed this a lot. And it was a lesser known book, so I decided to kind of go against my usual way of purchasing and buy this before I read it. Unfortunately, it did not pull through. The concept of this is fascinating. You have a broken moon that falls down in pieces like meteors, and when it falls, it gives like little hints of prophecies, and it's very coveted in this world. You also have a high-cost magic system and like a lost royal as your main character. It just sounds like everything that I would love, but unfortunately, the execution of those things just didn't hit right. I hated our main character. I don't even remember his name. You know what? I don't need to look. I don't need to remember. But I hated this character so much that reading from his perspective was just torture. Because the character development you're waiting for when you read from a first-person perspective like this takes like 300, 400 pages to happen. So you're just stuck with this brat for 300 to 400 pages. And I couldn't do it. I do know some people who have loved this book though, so, you know, don't write it off your list. Maybe it'll hit better for you than it did for me, but I just had really high expectations that it didn't meet. And the second one for this is going to be Calling on Dragons. This is a book that I read recently. I'm rereading the Enchanted Forest Chronicles, which is a book that I loved, or a series that I loved as a child. I would check it out at the library multiple times in a row and read it. The first 2 books in the series were phenomenal. I loved them, 5 stars, but the third book just did a nosedive. That's what this was. Did a nosedive in quality. I talked about this more in depth in my most recent wrap-up, so I will be sure again to link that above and down below. But essentially, this book follows some new characters, and the new characters don't particularly pull you in as the originals do. And then the storyline ended up being very repetitive, where in the first 2 books, the story had like this charm to it, this almost simplistic fairy tale pinch of magic to it. In the 3rd book, it felt tired and like it's been done multiple times. You already know how it's gonna end. So this 3rd book was really disappointing in both of those regards. The 4th book, however, has redeemed itself, so that'll be coming in my wrap-up next month, but yeah, it's looking good for the end of the series. Number 6 is Biggest Surprise. Again, I have 2 answers. Not surprised. The first one is Raybearer by Jordan Ifueko. Now this was a surprise because I felt myself pulling farther and farther away from YA fantasy. It's not that I'm like sticking my nose about it, but I feel that I just can't relate to a lot of the character arcs, and as a character-based reader, I need to be able to do that. But this book blew my mind with how good it was. The world building was so unique, the magic system breathtaking, the descriptions beautiful, and the characters, I'm obsessed. You know, everything about this book was fantastic. To the point where I bought the special edition from Fairy Loot, and then they released news that they're going to be selling the first and the second book as like a package deal with a new design, and I was like, I mean, I can own two versions of this book. I'm okay with that. So, you know, this took me by storm. I loved it so much. This is another African-based fantasy, but very, very different from The Rage of Dragons or Fires of Vengeance, so don't go into it looking for anything connecting the two. We follow our main character, Tarisai, who has been sequestered by her mother her entire life, and so she's very innocent and naive to the world, and then her mother sends her out on a mission with very little information, where she has to go infiltrate the monarchy of this world. That's all I'll say, because I don't want to give any of the early revelations away, but it's a beautiful, beautiful story of what true strength means and how you can find it within yourself and within others. The second one is Howl's Moving Castle. I just read this book as the buddy read for the Ghibli readathon that I'm doing currently. I am obsessed with this book. I loved it. I had seen the Ghibli movie ages ago, you know, when it first came out, and it has always been kind of a comfort movie for me, but it was never my actual favorite of the Ghibli movies. I had heard that those that love the movie hate the book, and those that love the book hate the movie. But maybe because I was kind of in between, I didn't have, you know, super love or super hate for the original media that I watched it in, I adored the book to the point where it made the movie more of a favorite for me. I feel like the differences in the two really support each other, and I love both adaptations. I devoured this in just a couple days, and I am dying to have my own edition of this on the shelves because this is one of those books that I think I'm gonna reread and reread and reread. Okay guys, so I realized that I forgot to talk about two books that fit this category really well. The first one is Children of Time by Adrian Chukowski. I read this as one of the first sci-fi books that I really went into hoping to delve into the genre, and I didn't expect to love it, but I expected to be interested. But I loved this book. It was so gripping to me, even though I'm usually a character-based reader, and characters aren't the main thing in this book. The themes that this book deals with, humankind, our trajectory into the future, evolution, how much can humans actually be trusted, things like that, that type of theme really pulled me in, and I was completely invested in this book. Plus, this book explores the idea of other species, in this book, spiders, having the developmental capabilities that humans have, even more so, and what kind of world that would result in. And I loved the spiders in this book. Like, I didn't think that I would because I don't like spiders, but I adored them. Then I also was pleasantly surprised by Sapiens. This is a nonfiction book, and I do read nonfiction typically as audiobooks. And usually I kind of read them, take in the information, and move on. They don't really stick with me for too long. But this book really stuck with me. And I'm realizing right now it deals with a lot of the same things, the same themes as Children of Time. So the evolution of humankind, what we're like at our core, kind of just exploring what our future may look like based on our past. I really enjoyed every second of reading this book. Humans are a weird and fascinating species. I actually got the comic version of this book from my parents because I loved it so much, so I'm excited to get to that one in the future. Number 7 is favorite new author. For this one, I'm gonna go with 2 again. The first one is Robin Hobb. I had been wanting to start reading her collection of works for a very long time, but I decided in the second half of this year to finally make it a priority. And I read Assassin's Apprentice this month. Now, my full thoughts will be in my upcoming wrap-up, but let me just say, spoiler alert, I adored this book. When I was less than 20% through, I knew, I felt a Robin Hobb obsession starting to grow and knew that I was going to be blowing my way through all of her works in the next, half a year. Her writing just hits this little place in my heart that I didn't know was waiting for it, It just makes me feel at home. At the same time, it tugs on my heartstrings. I cried in this first book. Her writing just hits right for me, so I very much plan to read all of her backdated books. I'll be reading Royal Assassin coming soon. I did order a physical copy because I'd like to have my own copies to tab at this point, so I will be reading that soon, but she is absolutely a new favorite author. The next one is Mike Brooks. Who's shocked? No one's shocked. Like I said, have a whole review for this book. It blew my mind. I'm going to be watching out for anything Mike Brooks publishes in the future. I think this is his debut novel, so I don't think there's a backlist for me to work through, but best believe I'm following him on social media, and I will be looking for anything he puts out in the future, especially, as I mentioned earlier in this book, The Splinter King, the next book in this series. Number 8 is Newest Fictional Crush. Okay, I swear to God this is the last time I'm going to mention this book in this video, but Sana from the Black Coast is a huge, huge book crush of mine. I think last year I talked about Ashlyn Yarnheim from the Nevernight series, and Sana is very much the same vibe. I think I have a type. They're both very, hardcore, badass Viking women, which I'm not mad about, I think it's just my weakness. Sana is a main character we follow in this book. She is the leader of her community, she's a mother, and she decides to make the hard decision to uproot her entire community, to move them from their homeland in order to keep them safe. And the way that she navigates this new future that they have, the combination of strength and willingness to compromise and hear other people, the way that she struggles with being a mother while having her own ambitions and wanting her daughter to do well as well. She's just such a multifaceted, detailed, nuanced character that has this beautiful Viking envelope to be wrapped in. Number 9 is newest favorite characters. So for this one, I'm gonna go with, can you guess it? 2 answers. The first one is going to be Calcifer from Howl's Moving Castle. I loved Calcifer from when I first saw the Ghibli movie adaptation, you know, eons ago. But having read the book now, I just have so much more of a love for the nuance and the predicament of this character. He's the comedy relief, he's kind of the antagonist, he exists in this gray space, but the author and the Ghibli adaptation do a really good job of making him this lovable gray character. And he just brings me so much joy. I always smile when he's either on page or on screen. The second one is going to be Tarisai from Raybearer. Now, I know I've already mentioned Raybearer, but one of the reasons that it was such a surprise and I loved it so much was not just the world building and the magic system and the story, but it was Tarisai as the main character. She stands out in this time when kind of strong, badass women who can kill people are the main archetype. Now, don't get me wrong, I just said that I loved Sana, who is a Viking woman of that archetype, so I still adore it myself. But Tarisai really stands out because she can do those things, but that's not her main thing. That's not what she does. A lot of her strength comes from the understanding she has for people, the empathy, the way that she cares about others and the love that she shows. And it's not in like a cheesy way. It just is who she is. And it makes her this incredibly strong main character that you have to fall in love with. Did this just develop into fictional crushes? Maybe I should have put her up with Sana. Maybe I will. These 2 questions are interchangeable anyway. I'll leave it at that. Number 10, books that made you cry. So for this one, the first one is going to be From a Whisper to a Rallying Cry by Paula Yu. This is a recent read that I had, and again, I talked about it in depth in my most recent wrap-up, so go check that out. But this is a nonfiction book about the murder and trial of Vincent Chin, who is a Chinese-American man in the United States during the Japanese car boom. Vincent Chin was murdered very blatantly for the fact that he was Asian, and the fact that his murderer connected that aspect of his identity to Americans losing jobs in the car industry. And it is just such a hard book to read, I think, in general, but for me specifically, as my husband is Japanese, we're thinking about moving to the States. I need to be aware of these kind of cultural nuances that exist in my home country. And reading this book, I could picture this man as my husband. Obviously, this book is a tragedy either way, and Vincent Chin's life was important just by merit of him being who he is. But when you read a book, especially a nonfiction book that is heavy-hitting like this, and the victim so closely relates to someone that you love, it makes it 10 times harder to process and to read. I'm sure people from marginalized communities who face, violence out there are aware of this, but this particular instance in this story really hit hard for me in that regard. And I was crying both from anger and from sadness at different points in this story. Please pick this book up, especially if you are American, because I think that it discusses an aspect of American history that we don't discuss or bring up, and we really need to be, because I'd never heard of Vincent Chin before. But this tragedy that took place was a huge thing and had a huge impact on the AAPI community in America, and people should be aware of it. The second book that made me cry was Groan by Tiffany D. Jackson. Guys, when I read this book, I made the mistake of listening to the audiobook and then doing that on the public bus. I almost bawled my eyes out in front of complete strangers, you know, the old man coughing in the corner and, you know, the young kid, you know, excited to go to the mall. I was between those people trying not to bawl my eyes out because this book was so beautiful, but so painful at the same time. This book follows very closely the recent allegations that have come to light, well, I guess not recent anymore, a year or two ago now, about R. Kelly, and how the intersection of misogyny, racism, you know, trauma, gaslighting, how all of these things can come together and create a space where one feels completely trapped. And the roller coaster ride of emotions this book takes you on as our main character struggles with all of these things is just heart-wrenching. But the end of this book does end with a lot of beauty and quite a bit of hope. So I highly recommend you pick this book up if you haven't, because it's absolutely worth your time. Number 11 is books that made you happy. So for this one, I'm going to go with both Hug and Home by June Ida. Now, these I did get last year, but I have reread them multiple times this year, re-looked at them multiple times this year, so I'm going to say that these count. The reason I say looked at and not read is that both of these are collections of art by an artist who does have children's books that, you know, have words that you can read, but these two specifically are collections of his art only. And they are exactly what you can imagine. So this first one is called Hug, and it depicts different hugs between different types of people. And then the second one is called Home, and this depicts different types of homes, but in a more whimsical way. So where you might find a home in a tree, where you might find a home in space, where you might find a home inside a trumpet, you know, like this artist slash author, June Ida, really excels in finding the beauty in the little things, in the little details, and he really inspires this feeling of if you look hard enough, there's magic in the world that you just haven't seen yet. Plus, during this panini, where I haven't been able to go home or hug my American family, my parents, you know, I love my husband, I love my husband's family, but it's been over 2.5 years since I've been able to hug my family or see my home that I grew up in. And these books just give me that comfort for the few seconds that I'm looking at them. Just to give you an idea of what these look like, they are printed directly on the hardcover as well as on the dust jacket, which we all love. How can you not? You've got some end pages that has a nice little curtain on it. Curtain up. Here is one of the pictures where you have a monster hugging a little boy. We also have one here that's like a prince and a princess, a little bit more classic with his or her, is it his, I guess, his robe blowing in the wind. One of my favorites is between this old couple here. Then we have Home. As you can see, it's also printed on the hardback here. We have a little door through which we enter the world of different homes. So here we have a little garden house, lots of blues and a lot of purples. There's a vibe there. We have a house here made of yarn by those hard at work. We also have, let's see, a house on the back of a cart, a horse carriage. And here is the trumpet picture that I mentioned earlier. So there are tons more pictures of different homes in here. Don't worry, I didn't spoil the whole, you know, collection there, but I just pull these out, like if I'm having a coffee, if I'm about to go to bed, if I'm feeling sad or homesick. These books just make me feel better. And so I would say these are the epitome of books that made me happy. And the second one for this is Amari and the Night Brothers. I read this when I was on my middle grade kick, and this book is whimsical, magical, wonderful. Again, kind of like Home and Hug. It brings you this feeling of, if I look a little closer, there's some magic in this world. And that was just something that I needed in the recent months. So this book really hit the spot. I'm sure you've heard people talking about this before, but this is kind of like a middle grade meets Men in Black, where our main character Amari discovers this whole magical world that exists, you know, in parallel with her world, and there's a society that works to keep harmony between the two, and she ends up joining the society. It's a wonderful first book in a series, and it'll just make your day better than when you started it. Okay, just a couple more questions. The next one is most beautiful book you've bought this year. Now this answer is without a doubt my Way of Kings 10th anniversary, like leather-bound edition, but that had to be sent to my American house, and as you've heard just in my last part of this video, I haven't been back to the States in quite some time. So that book is not in my hands. So I decided to go with a book that I do have with me, which does rival it, and that is this beautiful Japanese anniversary edition of Winnie the Pooh. So first, this is the dust jacket. Okay. Then, if we take the dust jacket off, okay, we have this printed directly on the hardback, and it wraps all the way around, okay? Then, when we open the book, we've got these beautiful end pages that show the 100-acre wood on the front and the back. Wow, you can hear that crack as I open it. Then the pages are yellow, but they include all of these little illustrations. This is a stunning edition of Winnie the Pooh. I loved these stories when I was younger, and I want to be able to pass those on to my kids one day in both languages. So I do plan to be reading this, you know, in Japanese myself, but I do hope to have other little minds loving this book in the future. The last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Again, a couple answers for this. The first one is Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. I bought this book when it first came out. Have I read it yet? No. I did start it. I've mentioned on my channel before, I've got the tabs in the front. I think I'm gonna have to start from the beginning again, but I do want to finish this book this year. It is technically on my TBR this month, but we'll see if I get to it. But this is absolutely gonna be finished by the end of the year. The next series I need to finish is the Vampire Academy. So I discovered this series through my Retro Reads challenge that I do on my channel, where I pull, you know, backlist books from this little ceramic jar that you see here, and I give a shot to some books that I might not have picked up otherwise. Vampire Academy was so shocking with how good it was. I guess this should have been in my surprising things as well, because that was this year. This book completely surprised me. I loved the first one in the Vampire Academy series, and the second one also did not disappoint whatsoever. So I definitely plan to finish this series this year. I blow through these books. They're not hard to get through, very easy to read. So I would like to finish that, you know, before 2021 is over. And the last one for this question is one that I did already mention in this video, but that is Robin Hobb. I would like to read as many of her books as I possibly can this year, especially at least through the Live Ship Traders trilogy. I really want to get to that trilogy because, I mean, talking sentient pirate ships, sign me the fuck up. The very last prompt is, who are your favorite community members? Truly, I think a lot of us have gone through it in the past year that we've been online. I've made so many wonderful friends on here. I don't have a favorite, you know, creator. Anyone that comments on my videos that I engage with that are part of, you know, my experience on this platform, you're all my favorite. I know it's cheesy and it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, but it is the truth. Like, I just really treasure all of the interactions that I have. So thank you guys so much for engaging with my content, for being interested in what I have to say. It's brought so much joy to my life. That concludes my mid-year freak out tag. Leave a comment down below if you have anything to say about any of these books, if you agree, disagree with any of my opinions. I'd love to know your answers to some of these questions. Anything and everything, I'd love to chat. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. It really helps me with the algorithm, and I appreciate it. But for now, I'm gonna head out. Jane!